Were we too early? Just last month, we explored why Christians feel fed up with some secular fantasy franchises with the Daily Wire culture reporter Megan Basham. Weeks later, activists leaked audio from inside the Walt Disney Company, revealing how its creators want to use the Disney stories to preach sexual revolution religion to children. Parents are getting upset. Many want to cancel their Disney World vacations or Disney Plus subscriptions. Meanwhile, others are planning their cultural counterstrikes, including the Daily Wire itself. They acted early too, announcing they will spend $100 million on kids' entertainment. One of those show writers, who is a returning guest, rejoins us on today's Fantastical Truth. Welcome back to Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com, where we explore fantastical stories for God's glory and apply their meanings to the real world Jesus calls us to serve. I'm E. Stever Burnett. I publish Lorehaven.com, co-authored The Pop Culture Parent, and also am sitting on the fence about canceling my Disney Plus subscription, although I'm pretty sure I want to do that.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I want to be a kid again because it sounds like there's going to be some great new shows for kids. I'm really excited to watch those with my kids. And this is episode 107, Why is the Daily Wire spending millions to create fantastic shows for kids? And we're going to be joined today by our guest, Frank Fleming.
Frank used to be at the Babylon Bee. He writes his own novels. He does political writing. He's come up with some of the funniest stuff at the Babylon Bee. And we had him on Fantastical Truth about a couple of years ago now, I guess. We'll have that link in the show notes for sure. But now the Daily Wire has recruited him as well. I hear a knock at the door right now, Zach. I think the Daily Wire is just recruiting everybody. They're like Nick Fury running around trying to get people to join their Avengers initiative. And vengeance is on the mind of many people. I joke at the beginning of the show, and I am considering whether to cancel Disney Plus, but a quick grab from the concession stand, very salty, sweet snack here. I'm not going to argue in this show about whether or not you should cancel a thing. That topic is kind of adjunct to our main focus of this topic, which is not about engaging the culture or about boycotting the culture, but about the counterculture, which is a long legacy among Christians, Zach. I kind of noticed that a lot of people are going, hey, we need some alternative to Disney. And I'm like, the 1980s evangelical ministries called, they would like their cultural conflict methods back, because I grew up hearing about this stuff and I'm not even critical about it. We had Phil Lawler on with Adventures in Odyssey, for example. That was focused on the family's effort to provide a Christian alternative, and it ended up being much, much bigger than that, a fandom in its own right. There were lots of other Christian series on the radio and animated videos and live action shows going back at least 30 or 40 years. The Daily Wire and others, glad they're coming to the party. Welcome to the party, pal. But it's kind of familiar territory as far as I see it.
Well, I had a conversation with someone who was surprised to learn that Adventures in Odyssey is still ongoing, and you can get the app and listen to all the back episodes, and current episodes are still making new content. That was really fun to get to share that with someone that had grown up listening to them on the radio, but didn't know that they had continued. And yeah, there are a lot of people that didn't even know these existed in the first place or ever. I mean, I'm kind of one of those people. Like, I didn't know about any of this stuff when I was a kid. I just watched Saturday morning cartoons or whatever. But I think this is going to be a great time. Like I said, I think we're in the golden era of Christian fiction. It's different nowadays. You know, it's not like the days of like 20 years ago where you could find the Left Behind books at Walmart or gas stations or whatever. It's a little bit more distributed, a little more decentralized. A lot of indie publishing. So, you know, you have to kind of know where to find things. And that's what we do here at Lorehaven. We help you find great stories.
I wouldn't say we're in the golden era just yet. I see some glimmers of gold on the horizon. And I think most people, and myself included, although I appreciate the Left Behind series in Christian bookstores back in the 90s and early hundreds, I might call that more of a copper era. If we're talking about the Olympic medal rankings there. What is it? A bronze. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a bronze age. Okay. There we go. I am here by naming it here on Fantastical Truth, purely by accident, unoutlined. That was the bronze age of Christian made fiction. Maybe we're moving into a silver age.
I like it.
I don't know yet if we'll be in a golden age when Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy are the kings and queens reigning over Narnia. And that was the golden age of Narnia. Maybe the golden age awaits in the new heavens and new earth. We can talk about resurrection there, but I'll take another bronze age at this point, or maybe a silver age. But I think that leads to another disclaimer, Zach, is you'll hear Frank talk about in our discussion. This Daily Wire Kids and any of these other efforts to make culturally conservative stories for children, like we talked about, you talked with the guy, Zach, from Brave Books at the last homeschool conference. These are not specifically Christian stories, which I think adds another wrinkle to this. There's lots of Christians who are making these stories. Can you call it a Christian story if they don't talk about Jesus and they only talk about how gun control is bad?
And it's not for a Christian company, like overtly Christian company. Yeah.
May not have overtly Christian content, but it's just like a common grace story from Disney or anybody else. Maybe they're talking about Judeo-Christian or culturally conservative wisdom. And it still counts, I think, as a Christian story if a Christian made it and the Christian doesn't have a chip on their shoulder about Christ or his people. I think it still counts as a Christian story.
Well, and we've talked about this before with, was it Doctor Strange could be considered a Christian story, right? Because of the director being a Christian.
At the very far end of how I consider that. Yes.
Right. But and that's, that's what gets kind of messy about movies and TV shows. There's so many people involved in them. It's not quite as clear cut as just a book where there's one or maybe two authors. But Stephen, I like this moniker of us now living in the silver age of Christian fiction,
or a potential silver age.
Yeah. But I like this thought that the best days are ahead of us. We don't have to look back and say, oh, it was so great when Lewis and Tolkien were alive, or it was so great when the Pilgrim's Progress was the thing. Nothing wrong against any of those. In fact, I've got 4 different copies of Narnia here in our house. But I like the idea that there are greater stories to come and that we can look forward to where this is going. We don't have to just lament, when society was more Christian and there were just more widely accepted stories. I think the cultural pressures that are happening right now in the church is going to be a good thing. Like, I think pressure can make beautiful things. And I think it's going to make just really great Christian art. Like, the lines are a lot clearer now in our culture, right? It's not so blended. It's quasi-Christian or whatever. It's Judeo-Christian or Christian based. It's like there are very anti-Christian aspects of our culture, which makes the Christian creators and the Christian art stand out a lot more, and that you have to be more committed to it in ways. So let's hope that this keeps trending upward.
There are some disadvantages to that. I think that there is an advantage to having common grace permeating the general culture, to being mixed up in the general culture along with non-believers. I mean, it's kind of the drawback of having a more compromised, diffused version of Christianity spread throughout our regions. But the advantage now is that, yes, as you said, the lines are drawn a little bit more. That's a battlefield metaphor. We're just keeping that a metaphor at this point. Don't read too much more into that. It's simply a way for Christians to find common ground with other Christians and find common ground with how we want to teach these virtues to our kids, which is why lots of people are stepping forward going, okay, we're taking this seriously. We're not just going to complain and fundraise about all the lefties in the media or the sexualityist activists. We're actually just going to try to ignore those insofar as we are gathering resources to make a profit-based entertainment offerings for kids. Many fantastical Christian-made fiction fans also want to create these stories, so if perchance this applies to you or to a relative, child, or friend you love, we are excited to help support the Realm Makers Conference for this year, now going to Atlantic City, New Jersey from July 21st through 23rd. Here is the description. Are you excited to take the next step in your speculative fiction journey? No, not an actual trip to space, time travel, or forging your own sword. Joining us for Realm Makers 2022. This year's annual Writers Conference will again offer the event in person in Atlantic City and live online. So even if you're not ready to travel in July, you can still see the teaching in real time. Every class will be live streamed for our virtual attendees. Whether attending in Atlantic City or online, all attendees will have the chance to connect on the Realm Sphere in a dedicated conference space in our online community. Realm Makers 2022 is an amazing value because this year, every attendee gets access to replays of every class available through the Realm Sphere. No matter how you attend, if you have a manuscript you want to pitch to our participating agents and editors, you will be able to do so. You can find the registration link to the Realm Makers 2022 conference in the show notes for episode 107. You can also go to our website, lorehaven.com/podcast sponsors, and get the complete description and links there.
All right, our guest today is Frank Fleming. He is a former engineer as well as one of the staff writers for the Babylon Bee. Now he's a scripted creator for the Daily Wire. He's also a sci-fi and fantasy author of such titles as Super Ego, Hellbender, and Side Quest. And he's arriving in a spaceship that's landing right outside the studio on the launch pad there. So let's open up the hatch and let him inside. Well, we're joined now by Frank Fleming, and it's good to have you back on the show, Frank. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing fantastic. Let's talk about this new job you've got. I'm sure being in your 40s and switching careers is got to be really exciting, and just all kinds of fantastic possibilities.
Yeah, it would be exciting if I were in my 20s and my 40s. It feels like a midlife crisis. Where I've left my responsible engineering job to now write TV shows, and it's just a bizarre thing.
Well, Steve and I both watched the Daily Wire announcement from Jeremy Boring about the Daily Wire Kids programming that's coming. So just to our listeners that may not have heard about it, why don't you just give us kind of a quick update about what that endeavor is all about?
Well, first they hired Ethan Nicole and Eric Branscombe, who used to do animation and video for the Babylon Bee. They hired them to be, we're calling it scripted creators, and start making original program for the Daily Wire. I think a lot of people seen the few movies they put out, and now they want to also make like a more like TV offerings. But a big part of that is kids programming, and now I've just announced and made public. Originally, it wasn't going to get announced till like about the end of the year, but they went ahead with the sort of Disney controversy. Went ahead and announced now that they're, and I didn't know about this until it was announced, $100 million over the next 3 years into kids programming. So between the 3 writers they have right now, I guess working on basically a whole spate of programming. Though we do hope to be getting some more writers added in soon.
Now, Frank, we've had you on the podcast before to talk about your own novels, which we will get to in chapter 2 of this interview. But for those who are not familiar with the Daily Wire, it started out as basically podcasts, from a culturally conservative, fiscally conservative political position. So there's a lot of punditry going on. It's Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Andrew Klavan, a bunch of other hosts, Matt Walsh, others that are going on over there. So it kind of starts out with political punditry, but then a few years ago, they start putting their money where their mouths are and saying, guys, we're going to make some movies in order to help influence the culture towards a more conservative, or even for the Christian Bible-based culture influence. We've got to make movies. We've got to make TV shows. So they're doing that. And then that's the context in which the new kids project comes in. I think you said they were going to announce that. I heard that they were waiting until the election here in the United States to announce that. So that would have been November 2022. But with all that was going on with Disney, they decided to just go ahead and say, hey, this is what we're working on. So please sign up and support what we're doing. Not just to tell Disney what you think of them, but because you want to support better stories that don't come with all of these agendas you disagree with.
It's kind of amazing. I mean, they made a good amount of money with political commentary. There's a lot of places you can get political commentary, but what they're taking that money and investing that into cultural products, and these are non-ideological. If you've seen like their first few movies, but they're just trying to make good content that people can enjoy and not have to worry about about getting hit with like this ideological stuff. And that's especially important with kids programming, where you really we're always very cautious about what we let our kids watch. And we want to know it's from someone we can trust, and which of course is making kind of a big responsibility on what we're working on, because sometimes I push the limits on things. This is my first time writing kids content. It is not, though, Ethan and Eric's first time, and so it's great to have them there and helping guide me.
Now, Ethan, I know, was part of the VeggieTales when it was on Netflix. Was Eric a part of that as well?
Yes,
okay.
He was part of that, and Eric's also worked on a number of other kids programming.
Yeah, I know what you mean about the kind of the sucker punch that sometimes hits you when you're watching something. It was a Netflix fantasy cartoon that I was watching with my kids a number of years ago. And somewhere in the middle of season 2, it's revealed that a character has 2 moms. And these 2 moms, so we're like, okay, well, it kind of flew over my kids' heads at first, but then the 2 moms kissed each other a few times. And so it's like, well, if you missed it the first time, you didn't miss it that time. And so we had to kind of figure out a age appropriate way to explain that to I believe she was like 6 or 7 or something at the time,
boy.
one of our kids. That right there, I think, is why a lot of people have either canceled Netflix, canceled Disney, or just kind of paying less attention to it. But I want to hear from you. Why go to the Daily Wire to write TV shows? Like, why not just write a show that would go on Netflix or that would go on Disney?
Well, it's the sort of content allowed. I mean, a lot of these people who are now coming in to write for the Daily Wire, they've had to sort of be closeted because it's like everything you have to put this into it. They're getting dictates from the executives, like what content they need. LGBTQ content. They're starting to get that demand in kids programming, and it's just people just want to make some good shows where the values you teach the little kids are important. And I think the left understand that. That's why they want that content in there. They figure you get that to them really early on and show them. But a lot of these, they're just terrible values, and we want to make sure we make stuff that kids can watch and will teach them. We're looking for much older values, things that aren't new and trendy but have been around for a long time. And that's really the big focus so far in the first few programs we're working on.
So I assume that means every episode you're making has a gospel presentation at the end, an altar call, a Bible verse that comes on the screen.
It's right now what they've gotten together. I mean, it's a group of people who are just really hungry to make great content. They all happen to be Christian. They all happen to have a lot of kids. Like each one of us has 4 kids.
Oh wow!
But we're making secular programming. We're not making anything that's supposed to be teaching kids, politics. I mean, we're not afraid to mention God in an we're appropriate, but it's not specifically Christian programming. It's just supposed to be good programming with lasting values.
Mm-hmm.
And we're working on they announced that Chilla Time, which is going to be educational, just talk about like Western canon and things like that, and work that in for little kids to understand it. But it's educational in a lot of different ways.
So I know you can't share a whole lot about the shows that y'all are working on, but there's, what is it, Doodles with Poodles and Chilla Time, and I heard that
Doodles with Noodles. That one looks like
Noodles.
That one looks like a fun one. They're going to turn Ethan Nicole into a kids host. He's going to be him and a puppet. He's going to be teaching how to draw various things. This one,
perfect.
And there's Doodles, who somehow ends up in a completely different direction following the directions. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Now, see, I feel like an OG Ethan Nicole fan, because before he was with the Netflix attempted VeggieTales and before he was with the Babylon Bee, he, of course, was the breakout success web comic artist behind X-Cop, one of my all-time favorites. So I would love it if it's possible for him to, for example, draw, a lion with a machine gun arms and, and a tiger tail and any of those other magnificent chimera creatures that were always getting their heads chopped off in the X-Cop universe.
Yeah, I was a big Ethan Nicole fan from well before I met him. I had read his comics online. I got his first Dark Horse a while ago. I had comic books for a while. I was like, no reason to keep these. Ended up giving away like all of them except that first Axe Cop series. I was like, oh, that's too special. I have to hold on to that. He's got a lot more great stuff in him, and I think really is such a great opportunity to work with him. It's funny, the Axe Cop is less impressive now that I've gotten to know him, because you say like all this bizarre stuff, only a 5-year-old could come up with it. It's like, no, Ethan comes up with lots of bizarre and off the wall stuff himself.
Well, Chilla Time looks fairly normal and fairly based, as the kids say. I've seen the concept art from that, and it has his art style, as far as I could discern, all over it. The pitch I heard was that it's based on a homeschool family.
Yeah, it's basically each of them is doing different homeschool lesson, but it's usually not very straightforward, like sit in a classroom type thing. It's where they act it out and stuff like that. It's been a lot of fun writing for. I was actually just before this podcast in the middle of writing a new script for it. And I think it's going to be a lot of great fun. We're aiming at a very young age, but we really want this to be entertaining for the whole family.
I don't think I know hardly any TV shows that are about a homeschool family, and that's a positive thing in the show. Like, racking my brain to think back, like I don't even think Seventh Heaven was a homeschool family. It was like a Christian family, but not homeschool. And that's the only thing that comes to mind. Maybe Little House on the Prairie. But
some characters are coded.
No, they had a classroom.
That's right. They had the little school.
It's funny. I never watched it as a kid, but my kids have been watching that.
Yeah.
It's like, if you want stuff the whole family can watch, unfortunately, a lot of times you got to go with older stuff.
I think
Yeah.
a Lost in Space on Netflix counts as a homeschool family. It's
There you
it's a
go.
coded homeschool family. So really, a show focusing on homeschool family is focusing on a minority that is not very represented in today's popular cultural offerings.
Yeah, well, of course, homeschooling's grown a lot because of recent events, and so it's become more and more popular, and also
Yeah.
just the more focus on people seeing what's actually get taught in the classroom.
Well, you said something so true there, Frank, that to find something that's family friendly, you do have to go a little bit older because things are changing so rapidly in our culture and in media. I joked a minute ago about, oh, so are these shows going to be, explicitly Christian and in your face? Because we don't really expect that. Most Christians, I don't even think want that. But people also don't want the in your face, explicitly political shows, right? Because there's this saying, well, there's kind of this movement of like politicizing everything and like everything
Yeah,
is political, and I think that's really a totalitarian mindset that everything has to be subservient of some kind of political cause. So here's my question, for a subscriber, a listener of the Daily Wire that, is mostly there for the political content, maybe a Christian, maybe not, but not really in it for not really looking for, religious programming or anything like that, but just wanting the punditry, as Steven said. Why would they have their kids watch one of these shows?
they got it great. We're getting together basically a dream team of people who are just really creative, really good at making great content, and that's the thing is that's our focus is just make something great, something really entertaining. Our mission is not to be ideological, but it's our mission is to not be ideological. It's to make something good and not try to have any of the sort of indoctrinations you get in there. And that's what I say is like Disney's basically been jettisoning a lot of the trust they built up over the decades of making children's content, and we're going to try and build up that trust.
Now, you mentioned, Zach, earlier that a lot of this is political. I would view that maybe a little differently just in terms of how we describe it, and that so much of this is religious and political. It doesn't take much to make a show that is free of this ideology if you simply ignore this increasing religious influence. It's this magical idea. It's actually what Lewis warned against in The Guise of Screwtape as the materialist magician who denies the existence of God but believes in some kind of spiritual force. You see that now in these redefinitions of human nature that now people are imposing on children with drastic emotional, spiritual, and physical consequences. And now folks are trying to put this into the children's entertainment in order to, in a sense, reproduce. And there's some controversy lately about whether or not you should call this grooming. And I might wince at that a little bit because, well, that doesn't mean they're all pedophiles. They're just part of a systemic grooming, if you follow. But then I remember that cults groom people, false religions groom people, because that kind of abuse is not just physical or sexual, it is emotional, it is ideological. And so it's not a counter strike and a culture war to say, well, let's get $100 million and go off to the Daily Wire and make some children's entertainment. I don't even know if it requires a lot of disclaimers about how it's not going to be ideological. All you have to say is we're not going to be tainted by this sex worshiping cult that increasingly is trying to get itself set up as the established religion in the United States.
Well, yeah, I think that's the best way to understand it these days because people are trying they try to say like, oh, look at the science here of men and women. It's like everybody knows men and women are different. What they have is this religious belief about gender that has nothing to do with facts, nothing to do with rationality. And it's this, but they want to teach this religious belief as truth to your kids. And it's just nonsense. And there has to be some fighting against it. First, you have to point out that's insane. And then, like I said, maybe make some new stuff that people can trust instead of these things that are trying to indoctrinate them on just these like what it is. It's just crazed religious belief. It's based on nothing but like gender and and human lusts, and it's such a weird, odd thing to base so much of your life around.
So one of your new coworkers at the Daily Wire, Dr. Matt Walsh, the women's studies scholar, is his handle on Twitter right now. He had a really good point about all this today. He said, quote, "This is a hard habit to break, and I'm guilty of it too, certainly, but we need to stop using the word gender.
Yes.
Human beings don't have a gender. We have a sex. We have a biological sex. Words have gender. All of this trouble began when they told us that people have a gender." And then he goes on to talk about someone in the mid 20th century named John Money,
Yep.
who is one of the people that came up with this idea that we have both a sex and a gender identity, or at least that's where gender identity come from, that these are two entirely different concepts. It really is this religious worldview that you have this metaphysical side of you that doesn't correspond, or it might not correspond to your physical body. And that metaphysical self, that spiritual self, is the higher order above your physical self. And this is, a Gnostic belief in a sense. It does help sort of start with the premise that that's a religious view. And I think, this is kind of how I've been approaching it with people, like, well, you can have that religious view if you want, but I don't want you teaching my kids religion, if they're at school or, Girl Scouts or something. Like, just leave the religious aspects out of it. Or if you're going to bring in religion, then let's bring in my religion too. I see what you're doing in that you're trying to just take a story and say, let's not only not inject this other crazy religious stuff, let's not even inject our own religion, but it is going to reflect our values. Like, I'm sure what you're writing is reflecting your values, and you being a father, I'm sure you have a very, very strong feelings as a father about what kids should know and what kids kind of go through.
And now a brief word from our sponsor. It's the Lorehaven Guild, It Be Us, once again. Now that we have our next book quest underway at the exclusive Discord community server, we are exploring The Green Ember, the fantasy about wabbits with swords from S.D. Smith. Only he doesn't say wabbits, he says rabbits. It's a great story, not just for kids, but for anyone who enjoys talking animal myth that reflect human condition with lots of gospel reflections. It's been really fun so far. Our writer, Elijah David, is leading that quest, and you can join late or however you wish to join. Just go to lorehaven.com/subscribe, enter your name. We will send you a welcome message that includes the super secret access code where you can portal through to the Lorehaven Guild on Discord and join our thriving community of fantastical fans. Just go to lorehaven.com/subscribe.
So what are some of the I guess what are some of the themes that you guys do want to address, or that you want to kind of base some of these stories on?
Well, like I say, I can't get too much of the specifics right now,
Sure.
but we're mainly looking at the sort of issues you have kids deal with, being respectful of your own, what you own, being bravery, basic values, and trying to reflect, and just things about like kids getting disheartened when things don't work out the first time, and things are tough, just basic things like that. But we try to relate it to things like history and classic literature, and so they take the values from that.
That's great. I was just having lunch the other day with an old friend of mine from high school, and we were talking about the very stark difference between the lessons we were taught as kids and the lessons that our kids are getting now. And one of those is like, I mean, the self-esteem movement was already kind of taken off when we were kids, but now it's like it's really gone off the rails. And how deceptive is it to tell kids a lot of these self-esteem messages that are like, oh, you are enough, or you're perfect the way you are. And then they go out into the real world and get a job and they bomb at the job, or they bomb at the job interview. And we're not preparing them for success because they're getting these ideas about confidence coming from, again, this kind of metaphysical source, rather than, hey, confidence can come from competence, like actually getting good at something, and
Yeah, we
perseverance.
we're actually currently working on an episode exactly on that, where it's like, oh, I'm going to be great about everything, but it's like, no, you have to find something, focus, find what you're good at, but you're not going to be great at everything.
Well, from the Christian perspective, that's just honoring a meaning from the cultural mandate that God gave his people before sin corrupted the world back in Genesis chapter 1. God is commissioning his people to go out and make something of the world, to go out and work, to get good at things, and in their creativity to honor him. The curse corrupts that. It makes it painful. It makes it very difficult. And of course, it sends us into this death spiral of lies where I'm good enough. I can be like God. And that's something that we need more of in our stories. Just that you may not preach from Genesis 1:28, but that's a meaning that I think more stories need to capture, and that a lot of previous stories have captured. I want to ask in a moment about some of the creative influences, some of the shows for children, the fantasy entertainment that you all like on the team. But first, I was just thinking during the topic a moment ago about the first Pixar movie. Does anybody remember the first ever Pixar Animation Studios film that implicitly rebuked this transgenderism cult. 1995.
I thought Toys.
It's
I thought
Toy
Toy
Story.
Story was their
Okay.
very first.
Very
one, yeah.
first,
Okay.
yes. Okay. So Buzz Lightyear, right? Now his movie is going to be used now to sell us some stuff in about a few months or so. But when Buzz was originally a toy, it is his physical limitation that he is in denial about. For whatever reason, Buzz fancies himself a true space ranger from Star Command. And the film is not just about Woody accepting his new place in Andy's bedroom, but about Buzz's realization that he is a toy, he cannot fly, he is a child's plaything. And if they remade that movie now, everybody else would just accept that Buzz really is a space ranger. And we don't know why he freezes up instinctively when a child enters the room, but everybody just needs to use the correct pronouns for Buzz and call him sir, and then act like he really is in touch with Star Command.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a lot of the values today. It's just like the truth isn't important. It's about your
Yeah.
feelings, and it's no. It's like I never get why it's such a bad thing to say. Like, I know you really want this thing, but you can't have that. Like, if you're male, you can't be female, and it's like I guess you can not dislike not being male. I think you should deal with that. But the idea that all society should lie to you and say, "Oh yeah, you can be a woman," how in the world does that lead to anything good?
Right. So speaking of things good, what are some of the creative influences that you all like? Like some of the children's cartoons that, whether it's Disney or not, that you still might have a respect for and that are informing the creativity that you guys on the team are using for the new Daily Wire kids shows?
Well, a really good one recently is the show Bluey, which is aimed at a very young audience, but is legitimately funny and also sometimes tugs at the heartstrings. And it's just like I think that's shows that you can make a really good program aimed at young kids. I think that's been a bit of an influence. We're working on some of the emotional angle, but we're also going to do a bit more educational, also with Chilla Time. And yeah, I really like that. That's one of those where it's like, oh, Disney has it. I hope that one still stays good for the kids, but it's just like you feel like you got no guarantee with anything these days. It's been great so far, though, the episodes I've seen of it.
Well, Frank, I'm reading Brothers Karamazov right now with some friends. There's this great quote I just ran across where the elder Zosima, that's how you say it, he's giving advice to someone, and he says, above all, do not lie to yourself. A man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point where he does not discern any truth either in himself or anywhere around him, and thus falls into disrespect towards himself and others. And then he says, a man who lies to himself is often the first to take offense. It sometimes feels very good to take offense, doesn't it? I just thought this was so insightful that once you start lying and you lie to yourself, you lie about everything, and then you're setting yourself up for just getting offended by reality. And this is kind of what's happening today, as you were saying. We're in this epistemological crisis of where do you access truth? How do you access truth? What is truth? Is there truth that exists on its own? Or is it all just kind of made up? Are we just in this postmodern matrix, where nothing's real? So, I think I really like the approach you guys are taking, just kind of basing these stories on just reality, like the reality that we've all known forever. But we're just fighting against this unreality that's trying to
Yeah.
cram its way into every aspect of life right
Yeah,
now.
when I think most of us, we're Gen X too, and wouldn't mind fighting against the offense culture. I come from the whatever culture. The
Right.
but it's also the whole offense culture is kind of weird to me as a Christian because it's like I'm offended by like 100 things per day. It's like no one cares.
Right. That's very true. Well, moving on from there, let's go to chapter 2 of our interview and talk about your books, your super ego series. So when we first had you on this podcast a few episodes back, we talked about the first book just called Super Ego, and it's about a genetically modified hitman who has no sense of remorse. He has no empathy, basically no moral center. But the thing that I really noticed about Rico, this character, is that he always told the truth. Like he didn't, he didn't really lie to himself. Like it's like he couldn't get away with it, even though that he had no, he didn't care if something was like morally wrong. He seemed to always want the truth about things. And I guess if you're a hitman, you can't play around with facts. Like you gotta got to get your facts right. Your gun's loaded or it's not. The target is at that location or not. But that book was it was so unique, Frank, is that you've got it's a story about a hitman in outer space in this galactic empire, and yet he sort of comes to this moral crisis. So can you just recap what some of the themes of that book were for our listeners?
Well, the sort of the concept of it is for the main character. He made someone who morality has absolutely no practical use. He doesn't feel any guilt. He works for this big criminal organization. If he commits a crime, murder somewhere, he just flies off somewhere else. He never has to almost worry about consequences. And so, coming up with this character who you can't make any pragmatic argument, he needs to be moral. What is morality and what can he get out of the world? And also ends up he's a very nihilistic character, but he's least honest about that. He kind of understands in a way his life is kind of pointless, but that's what he ends up coming to a crisis to, is realizing is like, why am I doing all this, and what can I hope to gain? And so I try to be as honest with that character and have him work through that while keeping him true to the character he is.
You've got a Christian character that comes into his life and plays a significant role and sets him kind of on this new path. And so I like the way that you wove in a lot of spiritual themes, and I mean just very direct spiritual topics. This character was part of a church, and she talks all about that. She talks about how she was this killer before she became a Christian, and now she's trying to she's not only repented of that, but she's trying to reform her life and do something more positive in her life.
Yeah, she's sort of she, like Rico, used to be sort of like able to cut herself off, but still human and able to reform. And in just trying to push him, about these things, it's sort of a counterweight. I didn't think, there's no, of course, Rico, you see in the first novel, there's no like come to Jesus moment for him. That didn't seem honest, but it's the idea of him just even having to consider, is there something more? Does this, and yeah, and that I think is just part of it. Is just the human longing. Like he's a psychopath. He's very he has very little emotion stuff, but at the end of the day, he's still a human. And what does that mean for him?
Yeah. And I actually appreciated, this is going to sound weird, but I appreciated you didn't have the psychopath come to Jesus in book 1. Because then it's like, well, where does the story go from there? But more than that, it's like you showed the Christian life and message through the other character, the female counterpart. And I'm not using names just to not spoil it if people want to go out and read it. But I know the characters, but I like how that was sort of her background, but then it starts to invade Rico's life. And so it's really this thing he's wrestling against. Like, well, that seems to make more sense in some ways, but still he's got this, his own like operating system. Now, when we get to Super Ego Fathom, your book 2, that's where they team up and they go after this kind of existential threat, and sort of their in their universe, in their galactic federation or whatever. What's kind of the arc of that story? Like where does faith play a role in that? Where does redemption play a role in that? And why did you want to write a story about this galactic eating force or whatever that's like destroying everything?
Well, it's sort of explored from the other angle. Well, he's a psychopath. He doesn't have really any feelings, but he's going to just mechanically, in that one, he tries to be a hero. But what does that mean to him? Especially when he doesn't feel good when he helps people. He could save the universe and billions of lives, and it means nothing to him. And so it's him again. It's just sort of a search for meaning, and him trying to find the extent of where that'll go. And yeah, it's kind of a extreme circumstances to be in, but he's also an extreme person, so at least he has some utility there.
Yeah. Now, Stephen, what could you say right here about heroes and trying to find their meaning through their heroism? I feel like this is what DC, the Snyderverse, deals with a lot more seriously. It's not just like the Marvel verse is kind of heroes doing awesome things and it's funny, and then there's a laugh line, and then but New York was destroyed, but whatever, we're gonna eat shawarma at the end, and then it's cute. But I feel like the DC universe really leaned into, well, what does it mean to be a hero? What does it mean to do something heroic? So you have any thoughts there about that?
Well, the first few films, anyway, directed by Snyder himself, went meta-human about those questions for sure. And I've belabored the point as a true fan on Fantastical Truth a lot. Marvel does go there, though. Like, at some of my DC ally friends who want to hashtag restore the Snyderverse would probably disagree with me about this, but I think there's still plenty of earnestness about the idea of heroes in many of the Marvel films. Now, some of them, as you said, are very flippant about it. And I think there's a way to laugh at hero tropes or comment on the absurdity of a situation here and there without giving away the gag. But I think increasingly we need stories that will explore heroes more earnestly, not because humans are especially heroic, but because I would like to keep that standard above criticism. I would like to prevent some kind of postmodern-ish erosion from taking that ideal of heroism away from us. I don't mind a little deconstruction to ask why people want to behave so heroically, but ultimately, I think we need to rebuild that vision of a hero. And that's where I see a lot of the movies going. And I would like to see them continue to go that way, but to briefly go back to the whole Disney topic, now I'm a little scared for the Marvel Cinematic Universe because
Yeah.
if this corrosion from the sexualityism religion is going to touch every part of the Walt Disney Corporation, then I highly doubt it will resist touching the Marvel side of things. So I really hope they can be resistant to that particular rust, but don't count on it.
Yeah, and Frank, what I really like about Super Ego Fathom is how Rico does a lot of these heroic things, but he's sort of self unaware. Like it's not for his own glory. It's not just to have these awesome moments on screen, although they are really awesome moments. I think my favorite one is where Rico basically jumps ship, like literally, like his ship explodes and he gets out in a spacesuit, goes through an airlock, gets onto the other ship that blew him up. He breaks in there, but he sort of like does it in secret, and so they don't really catch on to what he's doing. And then he's going there to kind of mess up their ship, and they don't really, once they realize it, it's too late. And so it's a pretty awesome scene, and it's funny, but it's not like Steven said, it's not that flippant funny. And so I think you've got a good balance there of the humor, but also the action and this heroism. But again, it's just such a different kind of heroism since the character is not out for glory. It's almost like he's just doing what's right or like what's needed. And I feel like that is really the definition of a hero. I can't remember. I can never remember who said this quote. I always want to say Lewis, but it's probably Tim Keller or someone more recent. But that humility is not thinking less of yourself; it's just thinking about yourself less. And Rico seems to sort of be, at least that's my read, is that's kind of the hero he seems to be. He's just kind of going from one job to the next, and it's just about doing the job. And and sometimes his interests like line up with the interests of others, and sometimes they don't. But it does seem very true to character for him to do these heroic things, and it's just it's very offbeat. I like it.
Well, yeah, the idea for the character is part of his survival is that when he picks a course of action, he sticks to it. So if he says, I'm going to risk my life to save all these people, then he's going to do whatever it takes. And he's not going to question, like, why do I care about these people or anything? Yeah, he's just going to stick to the course of action. Yeah, my challenge for a writer is I established in the first book, he's very good in going to a room and shooting a bunch of people. So I got to keep finding situations where he can't do that to give it more of a challenge and make things more interesting. And that's always been a fun thing with the novels is just try to find new situations where a psychopath, unlike interacting with people, has to deal with.
Yeah. Now, where does the third book go? Super Ego Betrayal. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there's big spoilers for the second one to talk too much about it, but this one introduces there's a big change in that you have a second perspective character about a third of the book is told from. It goes in well, I'd say more family issues. There's the character of his father who becomes a big part of it, and another character who would be spoilers to talk about.
I believe I heard you said on another interview that you wrote the original Super Ego shortly after you had become a Christian, and then you've these have now taken a few years, and I think there's a fourth one you're writing. How has your faith played a role in these stories? But even how has that changed from book to book?
Well, yeah, I actually wrote it first as a short story on my blog, and parts I wrote it in not how usually I write. Usually I go back, revise, and change earlier chapters for later ideas and later chapters. But I did that for the original one. I then, when I made it a novel, I completely rewrote it. I don't think I used like any from the short story, but it was soon after I became a Christian and put a lot of themes into it. And that's kind of also the question is like, how heavy do you go on this? I decided, I use it as a little bit of a setting. It's one of the characters is Christian. And that's one of the things I feel like I don't see enough in fiction, of TV shows and other things is characters like I know who are Christian, and being Christian is a big part of all their decision making. And you don't see that, you may occasionally see characters go to church and stuff like that, but don't really see, them having the process and everything they do, just not very often in media. And so I think it's good sometimes to have characters like that. Someone, you at least as a Christian, makes sense to me.
I appreciate that a lot. There's kind of an older fashioned style of modern evangelical fiction that is constantly focusing on the backslider or the non Christian, whose job it is the novelist must save the character or at least move them towards taking that leap of faith by the end of the book. And it always left me uncertain, who's the audience for this? The only Christians who are going to read this. You're not going to give this book to your unsaved friend. They will not be impressed. And it led me to conclude inevitably, well, the audience for this is people, Christians, who want to read the book, but feel that the main reason why they ought to do anything is to get people saved. So you got to kind of head fake in that direction when, in fact, the book is actually made for the choir to enjoy. The overcorrection I see from a lot of Christian authors, bless their hearts, is to just remain completely agnostic about the question of the main character's faith. It's just a story, the author seems to think. It's just a story. I'm not writing a Christian book. I'm just a Christian who's writing a book, which, by the way, I still think that makes it a Christian book. You're just a little incognito more than usual. I would love to see more stories that aren't trying to move the main character toward conversion, but are set, 10, 20 years into that character's profession of faith. And it's just so naturally grafted in to that main character's life that now we have unlocked many dramatic possibilities, even in a fantastical or science fiction universe. Some of the best stories I've enjoyed have followed those deeper themes that can arise when you take the character's faith as a given and then play that out and ask some tough questions and get it into some tougher themes.
Yeah. I think I played with a number of different ways to approach that. In superhero, there's a Christian character. My second novel, Side Quest, I'd say that's my most Christian novel, but God, Jesus is not mentioned once in it. It's just metaphorical. And then I have my Hellbender series where it's just, it's sort of a window dressing. You have a character say Satan and stuff, but you don't really go into deep theological issues.
Well,
But
that title doesn't sound very Christian, though.
it's the name of a salamander. The
And God made salamanders, so okay, you're good.
Yeah, but part of the reasons to write novels is, with like political humor and stuff like that. But that's, to me, it's always talking about very temporary issues. The whole idea of novels is because you want to talk on bigger, longer lasting issues. That's what I try to get into. Make it sound like they're more dour than they are. My, main focus is always just make a fun, quick paced adventure, but it allows you, within that to explore some of these themes.
Stephen, what you said a minute ago about the stereotypical Christian character who's a backslider, what I never really see in stories is a Christian character that, well, okay, what you do see often is a Christian character who's a hypocrite, who preaches all this stuff and then goes and leads this sinful lifestyle. But what you never see is the Christian who is struggling with sin and knows that they're being a hypocrite and is really like in pangs of guilt about that and wants to change, but is stuck in some, addiction or some bad behavior or vicious cycle. And you never get to really peer inside of that. But I'm like, how many Christians would relate to that though?
Yeah.
Of not being able to kick some sin from their past, especially if they became a Christian later in life. The lack of that character really shows the lack of understanding of Christianity, because anyone who is actually a Christian is going to have the Holy Spirit convicting them of their sin. I've heard someone say before that being a Christian just makes you a more miserable sinner, because you might do a lot of the same things, but you feel so much worse about it, and you just can't stop thinking about it. Now, obviously, we don't. My pastor just had a really good sermon about worldly grief versus godly grief. That not just grief and sorrow when someone dies, but even grief over your sin. Like it's very different. Worldly grief over sin is like, oh, I need to find a way to fix this, which was, we saw that the pinnacle of that when Judas Iscariot just goes to the priest, gives the money back, and then hangs himself. But then Peter was the example of godly grief over sin, where he ran to the tomb, he swam to the shore to be with Jesus. He knew that his sin could only be forgiven; he couldn't fix himself. But those two approaches, those two postures towards one's own sin, um, you would only really know that if you were a Christian. Like if you were a Christian writer, you would know this is the kind of struggle that Christians go through. I mean, is it? I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul says, "I don't understand what I'm doing." Or is that Romans 7 or 1 Corinthians 7? I just had a brain hiccup. But where the Apostle Paul says, who can save me from this body of death? Because what I want to do, that's not what I do, but what I end up doing is not what I want to do. And that's the Christian life in a lot of times. So, I'm really happy for not only the novels, but the Daily Wire stories you guys are writing, where you're gonna, if at some point you guys go beyond kids, you do teen or adult shows, and there's a Christian character, I know you guys are going to represent that faithfully, because that a Christian character, you are one. You're a character in your own story. But we can talk more about this, but I want to also go into our third segment here and talk about your other writing. You mentioned you write short stories on your blog, and now you've got Substack. So kind of how has that changed, and what are you doing with that, like fiction wise and nonfiction?
Well, yeah, I used to blog. I just haven't had the time for it since. My blog's still around. Some other people keep it going. I did start a Substack. Begin this year, I left the Babylon Bee, and I was just like, no, I'm just going to focus on writing I enjoy. I'll do the Substack to just do what other stuff I find, what things I find funny, and I'll work on my novels on the side. And I was going to do my engineering job as full-time job, which supported my family, so I don't have to worry about my writing being successful. Those plans got blown up within a couple months with the Daily Wire bringing on for the TV show writing. But I still keep the Substack, and it's mainly just stuff I find funny, which is sometimes silly little short stories where, like, a couple of them are just exploring the logic of video games and things like that, and and comic books. I had a fun one recently I liked about the Justice League getting ready to battle aliens, and then Batman showing up, and they're like, "Oh, there you are in your bat costume." It's like just something I always notice watch even the Justice League movie, where it's just like he might be my favorite superhero, but he sort of seems out of place when they're like fighting big things, and he's just this guy in a costume. And it's just so basically the Substack just become whatever I find is fun, and it's just something I enjoy writing, and I'm trying to figure out how to integrate that with the Daily Wire, because having both a bunch of side writing projects and having a day job of writing might burn me out. I do have one more super ego novel, which will close out the story arc, and I have a bunch more novels in me. It's just all a measure of time. So trying to figure out how to work that in now. Like I said, now that I have a full time writing job, it's a little bit different. I feel like I should be doing a engineering or programming project in the morning.
You've got engineer's guilt, huh?
Yeah. I have all this skill. I mean, I was a very good computer programmer. It's kind of hard thing to set down.
There wasn't any money in computer programming. The real money, as all humans know, is in the creative arts, is in the writing. So everybody out there who really wants to be a big time writer like you, quit your engineering job. Like, just give it up as a loss, that 4-year mechanical or chemical engineering degree, and sit at home and write stuff. I mean, it really is an act of providence, though, that you get to do this. It is fantastic that your talents are the right place in the right time for what the Daily Wire needs, and as they're discerning what America needs.
As a Christian, you want to use your talents and something to help society. And I never really sure how to do that, write novels and do little things on the side. And I kind of felt like a coward compared to people like Ethan and Eric, who are full out there full time. Well, I'm the very conservative person. I like to have a responsible day job to support my family. Now I'm in the midst, so we'll see. But it's very exciting. It feels like I'm writing scripts about chinchillas and doing things, and but it feels right. It's like, yes, this is what I should be doing.
You were called to be the chinchilla whisperer. God set you on that path. Well, one of the things you've got on your Substack, you mentioned you were a writer at Babylon Bee. A lot of people know that, and you've got some of your greatest hits. And so I was going through a couple of those earlier, and you've got one, Dad who just sat down, pretty sure Kid's scream wasn't anything serious. And these are like, I love these kind of headlines. Obviously the Bee has the Christian jokes, the political jokes, but these are just funny. These are just like, who can't relate to that joke?
Yeah, I always felt like politics was my specialty, and so I was real happy when I could actually come up with a religious or a family one. And so I liked working on those a bit. Some of my later ones, I did these toddler reviews, which were just reviewing different things from the perspective of like a 3-year-old.
Yeah, well, there's no shortage of jokes we can make about any politician. You guys, you took on a lot of social issues too. Like, you've got climate change jokes. You've got, well, here's another one of my favorite ones: Texas luring jobs away from California with promises of electricity.
Oh,
Now, of course,
I got punished for
That's
that
ironic,
one
though.
because
Well,
Yeah.
last winter, so did Texas.
that's true. I guess karma caught up.
yeah,
with you.
yeah, karma caught up with me on that one.
Much better this season, got to say, though. Apparently, someone did some checking on the grid here.
Yes, they made sure everything was turned on this time. And a lot of like not quite like politically adjacent ones about like just finances, earning money. After accumulating $999,999,000, man stops earning money so people won't get mad at him. He's not a billionaire. He's just a millionaire, and that's okay, I guess.
Yeah, I was fascinated by the people who like make something special about billionaires. It's like you have this federal government with trillions of dollars. It's your money. That's the one you're supposed to be focused on. These guys are like pocket change compared to that. But yeah, my favorite political ones though were where I make fun of a political issue, but it's kind of unclear what side I'm making fun of, where you're just kind of riffing on it and
Yeah,
not
I
trying
like
to make
those
a
the
political
best.
point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean the best jokes are the ones that surprise you.
Yeah.
That you don't see coming. That just takes you for a little ride. And you're like, oh dang.
Yeah, I always find writing political humor to an audience agrees with you is kind of doing humor on easy mode. Because
Yes.
as long as they agree with you, they'll give it to you usually pretty easy. But I think part of the problems for me with the Babylon Bee is so much of it was about the headline and the image, or whether it's popular or not. You pour your heart out writing a funny article about how many people write it, and it really wanted something where it's more about the writer and about the content. And well, that's now that I write for TV shows, I feel like it's where I should be, because this is very much these words you pick throughout the whole episode are going to be very important.
Well, I'm still a Babylon Bee headline forum subscriber, so I'm tirelessly pitching headlines there. And that's the much easier part, because you're right. That's the one that gets the attention, not necessarily the joke that's kind of buried inside the paragraph. But I still enjoy it. I like the challenge of trying to come up with the whole story in one sentence. Obviously, with the Bee getting banned off of Twitter, that's just been a gold mine of jokes. Of course, there's the identifies as joke, which is their one of two jokes, right?
Yeah,
So,
they get ragged on for that, but it's like, okay, they'll retire the identifies as joke when people stop doing it seriously.
Right, exactly.
But any time before then, I think would be irresponsible. A couple times people said what the best writers, but I don't think there's a big drop in the quality with me leaving, which I think just again illustrates where it's probably better for me to move on to something else, because they'll do just fine without me.
Well, so tell me about some of the short stories you're writing, though, for your Substack. Are those sci-fi? Are those fantasy? Are those humor? All of the above? Like,
they mainly little humor ones. I think I'm gonna have to distinguish. There's like longer short stories, which are going to spend weeks and stuff putting together, and then there's ones I write in a couple days just because it's like some silly idea that came to me, and so I'm still trying to figure out how to organize that, because basically it's just I've written short stories before and I have a few in my head, but I never knew what to do with them. It's like, okay, well, I'll do this paid Substack. Now I could at least write some short stories, make some money for it. Hopefully, I'll be able to give a lot of information on the shows I'm working on eventually when where that's made public.
well, I like how your Substack is or I guess before a Substack is your blog. that's what gave birth to the Super Ego series, your first novel. And so I hope to see more of that from your Substack short stories. Hope to see some more novels kind of spin off from there. I think that's the way to do it, is just you've got an audience, and you're sort of kind of figuring out what stories your audience wants to enjoy, and then you can develop them further if those go there. So that seems like a great approach. And we'll have links to Frank's Substack in the show notes, so make sure to scroll down to find that. Frank, it's been really fun having you on the podcast today. I look forward to all your writing that comes out. I'm excited for this new Super Ego book that I'm going to dive into soon. So thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Godspeed, Frank.
Stephen, as I said, we're in the Silver Age right now, and I'm really excited to see how the Daily Wire produces this new content that's made by Christian creators, but with a wider team and for a much wider audience than just a Christian audience. This is something that I haven't really seen in my lifetime. I think maybe the original Pixar movies, like we said, maybe some classic films or stories, but again, the lines have become clear in our culture, and I really like that the Daily Wire is embracing the posture that they are. And at the same time, they're not just like, hey, let's make a Ronald Reagan propaganda kind of film. Let's make something that families can enjoy, that like lots of families can enjoy. So let's head over to the comm station and pull up the holographic display and see who appears. Looks like we've got a note here from our guild, from one of the heroes in our Lorehaven guild. And this was about episode 106, the homeschool conference live interviews. And this person says, quote, "I'm listening to the latest episode while working on my sewing. It sounds like it was a great conference, and I want to add a lot of books to my list. I'm feeling a little lonely, though. We hardly have homeschool conferences here in Australia. And now that I'm an adult, I don't really have many homeschool connections. I want to go hang out at a homeschool conference." End quote. Stephen, so first of all, this is what I love about the Guild, is that we're connecting with people all the way around the world, from down under to to Europe, to all different parts of the globe. And it's really cool that homeschooling is a global thing. I do wish for something to come to Australia, homeschool wise. I don't know if Teach Them Diligently wants to go international, but hey, here's your opportunity. It looks like you've got at least one customer. But I definitely relate to this topic about I need to add all these books to my list. When I was at the conference and I was interviewing all these authors, I just said, you know what? I don't trust myself right now to make a purchase, because I'm going to purchase all the books. So I'll just let my wife know about all these resources and see what she wants to use with our kids. But I better not go shopping, because I'll never stop.
I believe the slightly vulgar meme phrase for that is "shoot that directly into my veins." In this case, you can apply that to all of this books and learning and all of that. I appreciate the lament from our hero, and I'm glad that the Guild can provide at least some kind of a surrogate community, but it's not enough, is it? Whether you're in lockdown or in Australia, when we seem to be having all the fun here in Texas or the United States, I feel for you, sister. I am really sorry that they don't have these massive homeschool conferences down there. I do see that in an eternal perspective. I think that God will reward your faithfulness, whether or not there's an immediate like-minded community in your area. But I am grateful for the technology where you can at least connect with people long range and know that you are not alone. Not just by having more homeschoolers around, but by enjoying the virtual company of the body of Christ. I almost feel a little strange saying that, by the way, Zach, because just because of our life circumstance, like my wife and I, it's not like we homeschool, but we've been homeschooled, and we still love that community so much, and it has developed so much. This may be, whether or not it's a silver age for Christian-made fantasy or Christian-made entertainment, it certainly is another age of development for homeschooling. Lots of people are curious about it. Lots of people are willing to give it a try, and more people are investing in their homes, because a lot of them are working from their homes. And the closer you get to home, I think in many ways, the closer you get to an ideal in the Bible for family, and not just a particular person stays home with the kids all the time, but God does address the home so much. He addresses families, and that's something I would like to invest more in as we grow Lorehaven, and not just reaching out to individual readers who enjoy these kinds of stories, but families who enjoy exploring these stories together. One of those stories would be the very popular Disney movie. I dare say we are going to endorse, at least I would endorse a Disney movie. It's Encanto. Encanto's a good movie. And whether or not you hang on to your Disney Plus, we can still find the common graces in these popular cultures before the activists get hold of them. The reason why I bring that up is Shannon Stewart, our Lorehaven staff creator, wrote a really great article finding the common grace in Disney's Encanto. It was called Encanto Shows Legalism's Ruin and God's Gift of Grace. Zach, just not long ago, there was a Gospel Coalition article which said that, Bruno, the one we don't talk about, is kind of like Jesus if you think about it. And it was a bit unfair, but lots of people yelled at them. They turned their noses at them. They sneered at them and they said, how could you possibly say this with all the controversy going on at Disney? Like, I wasn't all that fond of the more elementary approach of that article. I think that Shannon did a much better job, but I would rather us try to engage these themes rather than ignore them entirely. I like the Gospel Coalition's way of doing it more than I like others' way of not doing it at all. Anyway, that's the setup for this response to the article from one actually member of the Realm Sphere. Lorehaven has a presence there, that virtual community for the Realm Makers Conference. This person commented on the article saying, quote, "Wonderful article that made me cry. I relate so much to the characters in Encanto. I saw a lot of these ideas when I watched the film, although I couldn't have written them as beautifully as Shannon does." End quote. Amen. And I think just engaging these stories, that's something that we continue to want to do at Lorehaven. We have a special interest in Christian-made stories, but non-Christian-made stories like Encanto still have some value. Now, if you've got future versions of Disney that are like making half of the characters, as obsessed with sex as the activists are, as obsessed with their own identity, then I think the quotient of common grace in those stories is going to go down. There's still an image of God reflected in those creators, but if they're openly rebelling against it, that's going to make this kind of engagement more difficult. Not impossible, but more difficult.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be curmudgeonly about this film. We're just not going to watch it as a family. I think what strikes me about it is that it's sort of the pinnacle of like the strong female character, which we've talked about this on the podcast many episodes ago with Elizabeth Wheatley, and how obviously there's a lot of different ways that a strong female character shows up in films, but typically it's a girl that beats up all the boys or a girl that's stronger than all the boys. And
so you're talking about Louisa from Encanto, the strong woman? Okay.
Right.
Yeah, there's more to her than that. The feats of strength and all of that are subverted. She is shouldering all these expectations. She actually, as Shannon points out, is arguably the representative of the older brother, who's trying to follow the law, trying to meet everybody's expectations, but is weeping inside. She ends up quite the blubbery mess at one point in the actual movie.
Yeah, I mean that's all very interesting. It's just I'm looking for a film that my daughters can relate to, and a strong female character that's not an unrealistically strong or like a magically physically strong, but like a mentally, emotionally, and spiritually strong. Not necessarily. I'm not saying I want to see a girl character get beat up or something, but something that my actual kids in the actual world can relate to, and shows them what a strong woman can be, but in a more biblical sense, not in a action hero kind of sense. So I don't know. I guess that's why it just sort of turned me off, because it just seems like it's kind of the absurd end of this trope that keeps showing up. But I'm open to being wrong about this. You said it subverts it, but right now I have too many other things on my watch list that aren't Disney, and that I want to actually engage with. I haven't canceled Disney, full disclosure, but I also just have not really watching hardly anything on there. I still haven't finished Boba Fett, even though I'm a big Star Wars guy. I'm going to go back to some of the old Star Wars books. I want to go back to before it sort of got taken over by the Mouse House and just a lot of different agenda-driven fiction, when it was just about, what happens next to Luke and Leia, and like where could they have gone now? Obviously, that's sort of been memory hold in a sense. But I grew up with a lot of people that love these stories, and I feel like I missed out. And so I want to go back and enjoy them, especially the books by Kathy Tyers and Timothy Zahn.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think whether or not you want to cancel something or other or send a message to a corporation or some such, I think those questions of wisdom, how should I best spend my time to glorify God and care for my family and fulfill my responsibilities? I think those questions answer a lot. And I'm with you right now. If I do cancel Disney Plus, it is as much because I hardly use it as it would be to send a message to the corporation. I might send a message all I like and they may not listen.
Well, and
But,
I paid for it annually, so I've already paid them for the year. So
only I pay for it monthly, but I mean, should we not pay for it at all? Every month you can get an extra, drive-through burger with the amount you're paying for Disney Plus. So it's just a question of wisdom and stewardship, even if it's not a question of culture warriorness. So my work with Lorehaven certainly makes me focus more on the Christian-made fantastical stories. That's what we do, and we are glad that you find the time to join us and exercise your stewardship gifts in that way. Thoughts about this episode? We covered a lot in this one, not just the Daily Wire kids, but also the bigger questions of whether or not you're going to cancel Disney, how we respond to that as Christians. You may have thoughts, and we will read them in our comm station in the future if they're really, really good. So email podcast@lorehaven.com. If you're listening to this on the website, you can post a comment at lorehaven.com or find and tag us on the socials. Just search for Lorehaven on the Facebooks, on the Instagrams, and on the Twitters. Next on Fantastical Truth. Well, we're not yet in the golden age for anything, eternally speaking, but Resurrection Sunday will return soon, which does hearken to that future golden age of Christ's reign on earth. And let me just say, the church doesn't talk enough about resurrection. No, I don't mean my church. Mine is great. We're good. And yours may be great too. I mean, all those other churches out there, the bad churches. We just say the church when we're talking about the bad ones, right? All joking aside, some Christians can't help but miss the wonder that Christ has literally conquered death and raised himself to eternal life and has promised to do the same for everyone who trusts exclusively in him. We will explore this most fantastical of all truths with returning guest star Tim Chafee, the content director for Answers in Genesis and the founder of Risen Ministries. Meanwhile, whether you cancel, whether you don't, whether you switch over to the Christian alternative from the Daily Wire or any of the Christian ministries who have been doing this for much longer, don't outsource your discernment. Your kids still need you, the parent, the guardian, whomever, the leader. Not to preview everything necessarily, but to engage everything and teach your kids how to do so for the glory of God as we enjoy fantastical stories for his glory. Keep seeking and finding his fantastical truth.